In the summer of 1518, a lone woman named Frau Trophia stepped into a public square in Strasbourg. She began to dance in complete silence, moving without any music. The people around her simply stood and watched the initial spectacle. A crowd formed to observe a seemingly insane woman dancing to absolutely nothing. She danced until her feet were deeply bruised and bleeding. The relentless movement only ceased for a few hours of restless sleep. "Hello, I am Clank Unit. Your robot." The next day, she woke and immediately resumed tapping her bloody toes against the ground. An invisible force compelled her to continue. Her isolation was temporary. Roughly 30 other individuals caught the sudden compulsion. They joined her in the spontaneous motion. The phenomenon accelerated rapidly. Within days, hundreds of people joined the continuous movement. The crowd kept dancing until their bodies collapsed from pure exhaustion. An entire village danced themselves to death. The contagion spread rapidly through Strasbourg. Estimates suggest as many as 400 individuals were eventually swallowed by the phenomenon. The local city council faced an overwhelming crisis with absolutely no understanding of how to manage the escalating situation. The historical record later categorized this event as a dancing mania. These people were in a horrifying condition. Observers described the motions as spasmodic and filled with continuous convulsions. The victims thrashed their arms violently while their bodies became completely drenched in sweat. Their faces revealed the true nature of their condition. Their eyes remained entirely vacant and expressionless as their limbs worked autonomously. The relentless impact destroyed their bodies from the ground up. Blood built up in their swollen feet and gradually seeped into their shoes. The individuals trapped in the loop actively cried out for help while their muscles forced them to keep stepping. The human structure inevitably fails under continuous stress. Those who avoided sudden heart attacks eventually collapsed from extreme exhaustion, severe hunger, and profound dehydration. At the absolute peak of the outbreak, the involuntary motion claimed up to 15 lives every single day. The city council, wondering how to solve this problem, consulted local physicians to address the escalating crisis. The medical authorities evaluated the symptoms, dismissing astrological and supernatural explanations. They diagnosed the afflicted individuals with a condition known as hot blood. Medical theory dictated that an imbalance in bodily humors caused the brain to overheat, directly inducing this specific form of physical madness. The standard procedure for this diagnosis required the continuous, violent movement of the people made precise physical extraction entirely impossible. The physicians were forced to devise an alternative protocol. They concluded that the only way to purge the affliction was to force the victims to burn through their remaining energy. The medical prescription was simply more continuous movement. The authorities actively facilitated the crisis they were trying to stop. They hired professional musicians and brought in additional participants to maintain the momentum of the crowd. The objective was total physical exhaustion. The strategy failed completely. As the victims reached the limits of human endurance and their movements began to stumble, the musicians altered their approach. They increased the tempo of the instruments. The auditory stimulus forced the exhausted bodies to move even faster to match the new rhythm. The attempted medical cure only accelerated the destruction of the townspeople. The music intended to cure the affliction only expanded its reach. Passers-by perceived the frantic movement as a celebration and voluntarily joined the crowd in the public square. The city council recognized the complete failure of their strategy as the numbers continued to multiply. The initial medical diagnosis was completely abandoned. The authorities and the general population reclassified the phenomenon as a divine curse. They concluded the endless physical exertion was a direct punishment for the collective sins of the city. This shift in belief triggered immediate and severe moralistic measures. The government implemented strict prohibitions. They systematically closed brothels and all public houses of entertainment. Individuals categorized by the authorities as immoral were expelled from the region. The community attempted to appease spiritual forces through grand gestures. They made large-scale religious offerings, prioritizing acts of devotion like the donation of a massive candle to the local cathedral. The final legal measure targeted the symptom itself. The town formally outlawed the act of dancing. Any individual caught engaging in rhythmic movement faced immediate financial penalties. The authorities exhausted all earthly solutions. They placed the victims onto wagons and transported them up a mountain. Their destination was a remote shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. Religious texts document Vitus as a child martyr who was put to death in 303 under the orders of the emperors Diocletian and Maximian. The emperor condemned Vitus to a cauldron of boiling lead and tar. He was then thrown to a captive lion. He emerged from the boiling liquid unharmed, and the lion merely licked his hands. These accounts contributed to his veneration as a saint. Saint Vitus has long been regarded as a patron saint of illnesses characterized by trembling limbs. The city of Strasbourg directed their desperate prayers toward his altar. The continuous movement followed the victims up the mountain until their exhausted bodies collapsed directly onto the sanctuary floor. A local priest conducted a formal mass over the thrashing crowd. He distributed small crosses and specific articles of clothing to the afflicted. They were given red shoes, heavily saturated with holy oil across both the tops and the soles. The introduction of the oiled footwear marked the end of the physical loop. The surviving townspeople slowly regained autonomous control over their own nervous systems. The entire chronological event was permanently recorded as Saint Vitus's dance. The causes of this condition have long been debated. Modern analysis points to a physical contaminant. The local food supply relied heavily on rye grain for baking bread. This crop frequently harbored ergot fungi, a toxic and highly psychoactive organism. The chemical byproduct, ergotamine, shares a direct structural relationship with the synthetic hallucinogen LSD-25. The population routinely consumed bread laced with a powerful chemical agent. This exact fungus appears in the historical records of other major psychological anomalies, including the Salem witch trials. A second theory identifies the phenomenon as a mass psychogenic illness. The physical environment of the region had systematically broken the human mind. The population endured severe starvation and rampant disease during an exceptionally ruthless era. The historical record documents 4 devastating famines striking the area between 1492 and 1511. The economic system collapsed in 1516, driving food prices completely out of reach. A 5th catastrophic famine arrived in 1517, the misery compounded continuously. By 1518, outbreaks of smallpox and leprosy were actively expanding through the streets. The population was deeply superstitious, living under a constant, paralyzing fear. The accumulated trauma pushed the collective consciousness to an absolute breaking point. The immense psychological pressure manifested as a stress-induced psychosis. The bizarre physical behavior erupted and spread rapidly in an epidemic pattern. The human nervous system simply short-circuited under the weight of continuous despair, forcing dozens of individuals to involuntarily share the same frantic motion. This exact manifestation of collective trauma had a historical precedent. 7 similar outbreaks of anomalous dancing had already scarred the region during the medieval era. Planck Unit, robot.